everyone. This is a call to actions. We're independently podcasted on all the podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Podbean. I prefer Podbean. Anyways, we have a special guest today, and I'm not usually too nervous when doing interviews, but we have probably one of the best researchers in the United States of America currently. His name is Seamus Bruner, and just as a quick introduction, he just launched a new book that's available to the public at a lot of the main bookstores as well as online. His name's Seamus Bruner. He's the author of the brand spanking new book Controligarchs, Exposing the Billionaire Class, Their Secret Deals, and the Globalist Plot to Dominate Your Life. As well, he is the Director of Research at the Government Accountability Institute. So, on behalf of all of our listeners, Seamus, I want to welcome you to a call to actions.
Bobby, I'm so honored to be with you, and I'm humbled by that intro. That's very kind words, and it's great to be able to catch up with you on your podcast. It's been too long, brother.
It has been a while. Our mission sometimes our paths do cross. It's pretty interesting, and it's just an honor to have you here. This is episode number 65, by the way, but I plan on bringing Seamus back again because he has such a wealth of knowledge that we're not going to be able to cover in only 1 hour. But first of all, let's introduce our audience to you, Mr. Bruner. So Seamus, how and why did you get into deep dive research?
Well, depending on how far back we go, I mean, as a kid, I was always a curious kid. I went to college and did well in writing. I studied political science, thought I might want to get into politics. This is over a decade ago. And I volunteered for a gentleman named Peter Schweitzer, who happens to live in Tallahassee. I'm blessed in that regard. Getting to know Peter Schweitzer changed my life for the better because he put to rest any notions of going into politics. I first worked with him on his book called Throw Them All Out. And it was about how both sides in Congress are corrupt, and it exposed insider trading on both sides, how Congress members will get all the best juicy insider intel, and then they'll go buy stocks on it, and it's not even illegal. And if you or I were to do that, we'd go to jail like Martha Stewart did. And so that was kind of where I first learned about following the money and investigating corruption, and it was just fun. It was like a treasure hunt for corruption. Maybe there's something wrong with me. I don't know. But then Clinton Cash was another book that I worked on of Schweitzer's, and that was really fun. Just expose. I mean, because it was like shooting fish in a barrel. Everywhere you turned, the Clintons were taking more money from corrupt individuals, and Hillary Clinton, as Secretary of State, was selling out our foreign policy to the highest bidder. And so then that led to another book, Secret Empires with that's by Schweitzer, that exposed the Biden crime family and how they took millions of dollars tied to the tens of millions of dollars tied to the highest levels of Chinese intelligence. And it was the Burisma scandal that we broke, where the Ukrainian gas company was paying Hunter Biden $1 million a year for nothing. Apparently, if you ask the Bidens, just giving him $1 million a year couldn't possibly be because Joe Biden got the prosecutor that was investigating Burisma fired. And so I got to the end of a few of these Schweitzer investigations and just wondered, how on earth is such corruption allowed to persist? How does this happen? Why is it so obvious that little old me and Schweitzer in Tallahassee, Florida, can find this corruption so easily, like you have done up in your neck of the woods? And in time after time, realized that it's the Department of Justice and the FBI corruption in those agencies that allows it to continue. I mean, more often than not, you find the Department of Justice granted Hillary Clinton some sort of a conflict of interest waiver or some sort of immunity deal, and they always look the other way. And I know you're familiar with examples of giving tips to the FBI and asking and begging the FBI to investigate some terrible corrupt thing, and they never do. So that's why I wrote the book Compromised: How Money and Politics Drive FBI Corruption. And that might have been when you and I first became acquainted. Otherwise, it would have been the book Fallout: Nuclear Bribes, Russian Spies, and the Washington Lies that enriched the Clinton and Biden dynasties. And that was all about the nuclear corruption that you've done so much to expose. And Jeff Walburn and Chick Lawson deserve huge shout outs for the corruption that went on and is still going on in Piketon and Paducah and other nuclear sites around the country. And just to bring it to where we are today, I got to the end of a lot of these investigations and saw that, yeah, the politicians are totally corrupt, and they are not doing what their constituents need them to do. And they're passing laws like the EEOICPA that protect the nuclear contractors and really harm the residents of nuclear sites. And got to the end of it, and especially today, I mean, you see it all the time today. It looks like a clown show on Congress. I mean, I've met with several Congress members and tried to brief them on our findings, and more often than not, they don't even know what you're talking about. They don't even care what you're talking about. They're kind of just more focused on their next viral moment, and all their staffers are running around saying, "Oh, did you see so and so tweeted about us?" And it's sort of depressing to see what our elected officials are actually up to, which is not much. But that's what really led me to this book, which I think is much bigger than the other books in a lot of ways, because and we've all felt it. We all have noticed that there's actually a class above the political class that seems to be making a lot of the decisions, the corporate class, and I call them the Controligarchs, because they are really wielding the politicians and bending them to their will to pass the laws. I don't think any of the politicians, just to give you an example that you and your audience might be familiar with, I don't know that any of the politicians really know or care about like the EEOICPA. I mean, it's usually written by lobbyists for some giant nuclear corporation, where it says that, and it's very analogous to, this book came out of the pandemic, how the vaccine manufacturers have written themselves laws granting them immunity from liabilities. Like the politicians, they just need to be thrown some cash and handed a bill, and they'll get it passed. They don't actually know the specifics and the ins and outs and the science behind something like vaccines or toxic radiation. And so that's what this book is about, is exposing the people above the political class who just hand over a white paper or a pre-written piece of legislation, and the politicians just shovel it through.
Oh yeah. And again, this book is called Controligarchs. How long ago did you release this book?
Now, this book is just out, just maybe 3 weeks ago.
Right, yeah, brand spanking new. Um, yeah, the treasure hunt when putting together large projects. I've never written a book, but I have written some articles, and I'm constantly thinking about all the clues that I've learned so far, and how it ties in to one certain investigation, and how maybe a few may be linked together. It's really one reason that I wake up in the morning and get excited to get up in the morning is the research process and the what I call information excavation process. And I love the way you put that, is the treasure hunt. I love that, and I'm pretty sure our paths really started to cross when you were writing Fallout, and you put those pieces together unlike anyone's put them together. We've Jeff Walburn, Chick, myself, and some others. We've done what we could do, but we'd never formally put a piece together that explains it all in such a good uh, digestible manner as your book Fallout did. Um, yeah, that's definitely a piece of American history, that book, and I think it'll be read for hundreds of years if America is still here. Uh, though, moving on here, the cover of your new book, Controligarchs, what I see a five-headed beast here. There are five individuals. If you can, from left to right, would you be able to go over who these individuals are and their significance, and why you chose to expose them individually?
Sure. Why don't I go from right to left, because most people will have heard of the man on the right,
Yeah.
George Soros, the perennial boogeyman of the political right. Every nobody has not heard of George Soros. Everyone knows George Soros, and so he deserved inclusion because he's one of the godfathers of the New World Order. And so we can get into that, but I'll just briefly go over each one. So George Soros, I wasn't sure, by the way, if George Soros would be alive by the time the book came out. I mean, this all started 2 or 3 years ago, and the guy is now 93 years old, so he's really getting up there in years. So it's actually the entire Soros clan, as I call you, the spawn of Soros, as I call them. He's got 5 kids. Alexander Soros is the one who's just recently been appointed to take over the $25 billion dark money network called the Open Society Foundation. So we really get into Alex Soros and where the Soros dark money network is headed next. Sitting beside George Soros is Amazon's Jeff Bezos. Bezos is kind of a quiet dude, and like when he's not posing on the cover of Vanity Fair with his new muscles that he's
Yeah.
built. He's kind of hiding behind in the shadows, and nobody really knows what the guy's up to. A lot of people think that he's sort of a libertarian guy, and he just makes a great product. Amazon, where this book is sold, not my choice. Actually, one of the reasons I wanted to include him is because the Amazon monopoly is just killing not just bookstores, but every store, every local business. And so we get into his climate change ambitions. He's funding the fake meats. He's funding a lot of these climate control type technology, smart thermostats that are being used to force people to live in uncomfortable temperatures in their homes. And we can talk about that. I mean, it sounded like conspiracy theory, but I looked it up, and sure enough, in at least 3 states, smart thermostats are locking people out of their homes. So just imagine waking up in the middle of the night freezing, and you go to try to turn on your heat, and you get a little smart message saying that, sorry, there's too many electric vehicles charging right now, so you're going to have to stick it out in the cold for a few hours until the solar panels melt.
Goodness.
But
Yeah.
Bill Gates is the he's the central character. He appears in almost every chapter just because he's got his finger in so many pies. I mean, whether it's the farmland takeover, which a lot of people have heard about, or certainly his interest in vaccines is a little unsettling. He's an overpopulation freak who a lot of the characters in this book believe that there's just too many peasants breathing their air, and somehow they want to reduce the global populations. We kind of get into how they're doing that.
I think he invested
So
about $10 billion in clip-on bow ties too, didn't he? I'm joking.
is that right?
I'm kidding. Carry
That's
on.
fun.
Carry on.
No, well, no. To his credit, as I'm looking at the cover, that actually looks like a real bow tie. So I don't know. The clip-ons are a little thinner. That looks a little too floppy to be a clip-on. But anyway, he's in a bow tie for those who are just listening. And Mark Zuckerberg to his left. Of course, everyone knows Mark Zuckerberg. Most people would think they might know everything there is to know about Mark Zuckerberg, but that what the things that I get into with Zuckerberg are the transhumanist is stuff that we'll probably be talking about a little later, and I call it his $36 billion plot to force you into tech addiction, which is becoming more and more known now. But
Yeah, we'll
yeah,
definitely
he's actually.
we definitely need to
We'll
talk
go
more
ahead.
about that. We'll definitely talk more about Zuckerberg's transhumanism agenda, as I haven't followed much of his transhuman agenda, and I'm interested to hear what you have to say a little later.
Sure. And then finally on the far left, you've got this guy Klaus Schwab. Uh, I know the savvy listeners of your show are familiar with Klaus Schwab, but I'm actually stunned the number of people who don't know who the heck he is, or every time I bring him up, they get his name wrong. And I think Klaus Schwab, not necessarily himself, because he's sort of powerless without all of the interests that he represents, but he's basically the front man or the spokesperson for the Controligarchy, the World Economic Forum, and the people who fly to Davos to, every year, and we're coming up on January, you'll start to see the headlines, and it's the same headlines every year. Oh, all these elites, they're flying over on their private jets to lecture us about climate change. But I actually went through all of the various reports they put out, and they're into some pretty sinister stuff, especially transhumanism related stuff. So we can talk about Yuval Noah Harari, and I know you've probably seen that guy before, but if you haven't, I'd be happy to share some of his quotes. I mean, he is the visionary behind transhumanism at the global level, and he's praised and celebrated by everyone from Barack Obama to Bill Gates to Mark Zuckerberg and Google. And everybody loves Yuval Noah Harari, but if you read any of his writings, you'll probably not love him. So those are the 5 characters. There's room for more, or there wasn't apparently allegedly room for more. In my opinion, Elon Musk belonged on the cover. We also have Laureen Powell Jobs, Steve Jobs' widow. There's BlackRock's Larry Fink, who he belongs on the cover. So we could probably have a 30-headed beast on there. There's about 30 Controligarchs in the book, maybe more, maybe slightly less. But these 5 really, they get their own chapters, and they appear throughout other chapters. And the publisher thought 5 would be a good number.
Yeah. I believe I talked to you while the cover was being designed, and I suggested Elon Musk be on the cover. But that would have been good, though. It is interesting. They're flying over country to country in their private jets, while preaching a new climate agenda, or controlling the climate, or limiting certain pollution that causes global warming. But on the flip side, they're pushing for an agenda that uses weather modification or geoengineering as a way to fix 70 years of geoengineering that I believe is a big cause of pollution in general.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing is, and I feel it should go without saying, but it doesn't. So, but it should go without saying. I mean, especially when I get into debates with my left wing friends and colleagues, family members, is nobody wants a dirty planet. Nobody wants dirty air or dirty water. I mean, of course, corporations, you could argue corporations do, but they don't even, I mean, I wouldn't say that they want that. They just produce that for profit. But nobody wants a dirty planet. And then it gets down to, and I don't really get into the anthropogenic catastrophic. I mean, you could probably take a guess of where I fall on that, but I really more get into like what they're using climate change for. And yeah, I mean, the geo engineering and the weather modification stuff is obviously a terrible idea. I mean, Bill Gates wanting to spray, what is it, like silver iodide or whatever into the atmosphere.
Yeah, sulfur dioxide plus silver iodide as well. Yeah, I mean, to really in quote to mimic volcanic explosions. I mean, do they really want to shield the earth, or have day turn to night where there's no longer day or night? It's some very sinister ideas that they're attempting to condition the public to accept.
Yeah, and that's the kind of the worst case scenario stuff, like total collapse of humanity and planetary extinction, and so that's a pretty bad worst case. But the best case scenario is they're funneling us into a system of total control, because energy controls everything. Energy, and you notice this as your heating bills go up, and as your fuel, your car, your gas bills go up and everything. It's just like it touches everything on your life. The groceries bills go up when the fuel price goes up, and the price of everything goes up when fuel prices increase. And so like that, like taking control of that, it can't be overstated how it will control basically the totality of life on this planet. And so they're doing that by trying to eliminate. And I get, so if you want to launch it, I mean, we could go chapter by chapter, or if you want to start with like energy, because that's, I mean, I think it probably makes sense. Like I organize the chapters in a chronological type sequence that also builds on one another, so that I think we should probably start with the overpopulation and how these guys are Malthusian. They think the earth is overpopulated, and the climate change debate really grew out of an overpopulation debate. And so if you want, I can just kind of launch into chapter 1 and the Rockefellers.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, let's go ahead and just start from the beginning and tie all the pieces together along the way.
That sounds great. So I start chapter 1 with this meeting of the Good Club, and some people may have heard of this meeting. A lot of people haven't. And so this meeting took place in May 2009. It was at Rockefeller University in Manhattan. It was organized by Bill Gates and David Rockefeller, and George Soros were like the three like sponsors of this meeting. And so the context is it's May 2009. Barack Obama has just been inaugurated president. They all spend a tremendous amount of money to get him elected. And people like Oprah Winfrey are there. It's only about 15 billionaires. Oprah Winfrey's there. Ted Turner, the founder of CNN, and some others. And it's also on the tail end of the global financial crisis. And so there's a lot of populist resentment rising against people who cashed in on the global financial crisis. People like Warren Buffett and Steven Schwartzman of Blackstone, they all made a killing while people were getting foreclosed on. So it's out of this meeting that they come up with, something called the Giving Pledge, which is really just a scheme to launder their profits into so-called charity, which is really just their own foundations, which they in turn use to make more money. And it's not really charity at all if it's a profit-making endeavor. But at this Good Club, the thing that stunned me, and it kind of sets the table for the whole book, is they are there to debate, well, Barack Obama's just been elected. Why don't we take this opportunity to pool our resources into a cause like that we can all unite behind? And you think, oh, maybe it's birth control and abortion. A lot of these people are huge funders of birth control and abortion. Maybe it's climate change. They kind of have since this meeting become huge funders of climate change type activities. But no, what they all decide, and they all took their cues from Bill Gates, who convened the meeting, that the number one issue facing mankind, not pandemics, not yet, is overpopulation. And so you kind of people don't realize that. I mean, well, actually, sort of low information people do think that the earth is wildly overpopulated, and it stuns me every time, like when I hear people say that, oh no, like having kids is like, I don't want to do harm to the planet. And it's like, there's no evidence that overpopulation is a total myth. There's no evidence of it. It's not science. There's no science behind it. I mean, if you've ever flown in a plane over just about any country, you'll see lots and lots of wide open green space. And obviously, 70% of our planet is covered in water, so we don't have a water problem. We just have a salt problem, and there's plenty of desalinization efforts underway. So there really is no end, like resource exhaustion. There's no proof of that. If there were resources running out, they would be getting more and more expensive. Instead, they're getting cheaper and cheaper because of how abundant they are. And I'm not a scientist, but there's all kinds of scientists who speak on this subject. But anyway, that's beside the point. The point is, overpopulation is this myth that these elites have bought into, hook, line, and sinker. And so I started there, and then I was like, well, the Rockefeller Foundation just keeps coming up, and it kind of lingers in the background. And you go look at the bottom of some report that looks particularly nefarious, whether it's like the Event 201 or like they had these pandemic planning exercises 10 years before COVID about how everybody will need to social distance and wear masks. And it's like, man, this seems oddly prophetic. What's going on here? And they're involved in digital ID and CBDCs, central bank digital currencies, and all the stuff that just kind of raises the hairs on your neck of like, this seems not good. The Rockefeller Foundation keeps popping up. And so I thought to myself, well, why don't, because I had thought like most people, oh, the Rockefellers were kind of like these, I mean, they had Standard Oil, they were big oil barons, probably the greatest capitalists in terms of like their ability to make money, not great as in like heroic, but probably the most capable capitalists ever. And then, you know, what the schools teach you is like, oh, well, they funded hospitals and libraries and schools and universities. Like these are good guys. I mean, you know, in a sense, I mean, not so much the plundering of resources or what have you, but no, I went back and looked into the Rockefellers, and it totally shocked me that first of all, they were not always philanthropists. You know, Standard Oil was a cutthroat enterprise that in a lot of dishonest ways made its money. It would spy on competitors and use lawfare to put them out of business and all kinds of stuff that got it into trouble with the Justice Department. But anyway, so going through the history of the Rockefeller Foundation, I found that they've been studying viruses since the early 1900s, even before the Spanish flu, which was the last global epidemic in like the mid to late 1910s. They were researching polio vaccines and malaria and smallpox and basically every disease. And I found that because they were researching these diseases better than any government could, and that's kind of a theme here, is that the corporations are above the government because they are able to do things that the government is just totally incapable of doing. That doesn't have the resources, it doesn't have the organization. It's kind of dysfunctional, and I think we feel that all the time. But so when they set up their medical institutes, they exported this to every country all around the world. I mean, they were in China before the Chinese Communist Party existed. And what would happen is the governments and countries all around the world would essentially give the Rockefeller Foundation the keys to the kingdom. Because when you come in and you say, I can cure your population of malaria or smallpox or whatever the disease of the day is, the governments will give you whatever you want. And at the same time, they have their capitalist endeavors like Standard Oil. And after it was broken up into 34 different companies like Exxon, et cetera, the resources would flow out. And so it was a very profitable business model. We'll come in, we'll help treat your sick populations, and then you give us whatever we want. And then in the so that was like early 1900s as they figured out that business model. Then in the mid 1900s, 1940s and 50s, they had this thing called the Green Revolution, where they went into Mexico and they rounded up all the heirloom crop seeds, corn and whatnot, beans, and they took all of the heirloom seeds and they started tinkering with the genetics. Because they were a medical research foundation, they knew a lot about genetics and breeding and strains of seeds. And this is how they created sort of miracle seeds. There at the time they were known as miracle seeds, and they went into India and they would get all the rice and they would make miracle rice, and they would get all the wheat in China and make miracle wheat. And what their miracle GMO crops was basically resistant to pesticides and herbicides and fertilizers, which were in a lot of cases byproducts of the Standard Oil of their petroleum business. And so they sprayed chemicals and all kinds of stuff, and they found strains of wheat and created strains of rice that were very hardy and resistant to the chemicals that they spray on. And so they took over the food system 70 years ago in a lot of ways. And now everybody's using GMO seeds, and Monsanto is a big player, and they, Terminator seeds and all of that. And Bill Gates is now, we can get to Bill Gates in a minute, but just the Rockefellers were the Controligarch prototype. They did the same thing in education. They centralized curriculums and made it so that kids actually got dumber. I believe there's a quote from John D. Rockefeller says, I don't want a nation of workers. I mean, I don't want a nation of thinkers. I want a nation of workers. And so there's evidence that the education system has been dumbed down intentionally, and so on. So every industry, I mean, so they had energy with the oil. They had a total monopoly for a while on petroleum, and then they broke it up, but then they maintained large stakes in all of the companies that Standard Oil turned into. So medical, energy, food, education. I mean, that about covers it in terms of controlling industries. But
I want to comment real quick.
But here's, yeah, sure.
Just want to make a comment. It seems as if they had established themselves as, like you said, above government, but it's almost as if they were a like perpetual global governing system, just by being such a huge corporation that put its ladle in pretty much every pot. They were probably more powerful than most governments of the world, right?
Yeah, totally. And so it's actually like it was Rockefellers. I mean, the Council on Foreign Relations, I mean, in the United Nations, I mean, Rockefellers donated the land upon which the United Nations headquarters sits. And David Rockefeller was the head of the Council on Foreign Relations, and a lot of these globalist organizations. Well, and I probably should have said this from the outset, and I'll say it now, and I'll say it again, and I'll probably say it a third time. The number one goal of the Controligarchs and the characters in this book is to transfer power away from nations, away from individual people, to supranational, international organizations controlled by them. And so, like, what do I mean by that? It's like, by weakening countries, by weakening the bonds amongst the citizenry, by weakening the country, whether it's economically or by other means, mass migration,
genetically,
by genetically through its food, etc. By weakening countries and weakening people, that transfers power from the country to an international organization that is controlled not by countries, but by corporations and controligarchs. And so that would be things like the World Health Organization and the United Nations and the World Bank and all of the other supranational organizations that we don't elect any of the leadership of. So who the heck is this Dr. Tedros in the head in charge of the World Health Organization, and who elected him? And because they're unelected, they're unaccountable, which is the perfect system for a controligarch. They don't want to be held accountable. They don't want people to be able to vote them out. They want to be able to rule by fiat and by diktat like forever. So anyway, that's their number one goal, and you can see that, and that's what the Rockefellers have been up to for 100 years. So this is like a long-standing, sort of a conspiracy. I mean, it's in plain sight in a lot of ways, but it's sort of too complex for a lot of people to grasp, and it's a lot of people don't believe that there can be this long-standing agenda, but there certainly is an agenda that goes back 50, 70 years. And so part of that agenda and part of weakening populations is this overpopulation thing. It was the Rockefellers who backed organizations like the Club of Rome, which the Club of Rome put out in I want to say the late 60s, maybe early 70s, a report called The Limits to Growth. And so it's really important, like this Limits to Growth book, it was totally flawed. It was totally cooked up. It wasn't scientific at all, but they masked it in data and numbers, and it's kind of like the hockey stick graph for those who are familiar with that for climate change, where it's just like this graph that you look at and you're like, oh my gosh, it's just like a shooting spike upwards, and we're all going to die unless we do certain things. And among those things, this is long before abortion had become normalized. And Rockefellers worked very hard to normalize abortion. I mean, they funded this institute called the Hastings Center, which was hailed as the world's first bioethical institute. And just go look at the Hastings Institute's website and all of the things that they're claiming are ethical, things like euthanasia or the selling of aborted fetal tissue. It's basically just a thing that the Rockefellers funded in order to say, yeah, what we're doing is ethical, and everybody, and to put sciencey jargon all around it so that people couldn't ask any questions. But they poured tens of millions, billions of dollars at this point. The Controligarchs have spent normalizing things like abortion, killing your offspring, not having kids to begin with. They funded every single type of birth control and contraceptive, from IUDs to hormonal pills that you take monthly. They love pills that are monthly, by the way, not one and done type situations. And even this drug called mifepristone, which as we speak, the Supreme Court is set to review on the legality of mifepristone, because it's not like the Plan B or morning after pill. Mifepristone is like an abortifacient. It actually can kill the fetus up to, I think, any period, but 15 weeks or so. And doctors say it's actually extremely painful. It just so happens to be the most popular method of abortion in the country. It's drug induced or chemical induced abortion, and they don't. Planned Parenthood, who distributes this drug, doesn't tell young girls who come and get the drug that it's going to be painful. You're going to have to essentially deliver an aborted dead baby at your house. But nonetheless, that's something the Rockefellers funded, and George Soros and other control oligarchs, Warren Buffett, actually were behind a secret shell corporation set up in the Cayman Islands that profits from this. So I think even the most staunch pro-choice person would agree that it's kind of grotesque to be profiting from pain, because 80% of women who take the drug experience serious pain. And so you'd think if these guys were so charitable and they were so believing in the idea that this is women's empowerment, they could do it for free. But anyway, I digress. So the Limits to Growth report from the Club of Rome and the World Economic Forum was founded right at this time, was just completely centered on over this idea of overpopulation. And since then, overpopulation it's been rebranded. That's really all that's happened. I mean, so it because they realized in the 60s and 70s, the masses, the number one question after you tell someone there's too many people on planet Earth is, well, what are we going to do about it? And most people don't like to hear, well, we need to make sure there's less of you. So it's got a real branding problem, overpopulation. But so they rebranded it to resource exhaustion, which turned into pollution, and which turned into global. But pollution is like, a lot of people live in places that aren't polluted. And so you don't see pollution all the time, or if you do, it's like a gross, gutter or something. But generally, when you go look at a river or an ocean or, a beautiful countryside, you don't see the pollution. And so it doesn't have the same scary effects, which is why, something like a global cooling, we're headed for an ice age and we're all going to freeze to death. But then, they say that's going to happen in 10 years. In 10 years, it's not colder. So then it's like, well, actually, it's going to be global warming. And in 10 years, we're all going to die and the seas are going to rise, and polar bears aren't going to have any places to hang out. So that's got some really good, scary imagery. But then after 10, 15 years of that, people realize, well, wait a second, my winter was actually much colder this year than last year. So that kind of loses its fear factor. And so eventually they arrive at climate change by the mid 2000s. But even climate change is kind of, people have collectively sort of shrugged. Now, that's not to say that pollution isn't bad. It obviously is very bad. But, the idea, like what this is really all about, and what the Rockefellers sort of coined, and this is what the World Economic Forum was founded on, and this is what the Club of Rome was about, is saying that there are global problems. Like, there are these global problems that are too big for any one country to solve, and therefore you need to transfer your power, you citizens, you peasants all around the world. You need to transfer your power, your wealth. We need to pay hundreds of billions and trillions of dollars into global organizations that are purportedly going to save us all. And it's such an ambitious goal, saving the planet. It's quite arrogant, actually. But anyway, so collectively, I crunched all the numbers. I put them in the book. I mean, we've spent over $1 trillion since the early 90s trying to solve climate change or global warming or ozone layers or whatever they rebranded it to. Over $1 trillion with like pretty much nothing to show for it. And then the COP28 event was just last week, and they said we need more billions, many more billions, tens and hundreds of
Right.
more billions of dollars.
Yeah, I wanted to touch on that just for a second. Yeah,
Sure.
at the heels of the COP28 meeting, there surprisingly, Russia Russia's nuclear arm did attend and put on a presentation. I'm not sure for how many days, but they were asked by the World Nuclear Association to join their international group known as Net Zero Nuclear, which is really like a World Economic Forum version of nuclear. So here we have all these various countries. I mean, in the U.S. and Russia are supposed to be enemies, right? We have Rosatom, or Rosatom, however one chooses to pronounce it, working hand in hand with United States corporations, including Centrus, the former USEC, and Converdyn. So to me, there's a lot of conflict of interest there, and it really shows who is really controlling or attempting to control the planet and the minds of people by saying, okay, yeah, we're separate countries divided by borders, but really we go into these closed door meetings and we're all secretly working together.
You nailed it, because I get into this debate with people all the time where they're constantly angling for a new war, and Ukraine and Russia and blah blah blah, and China, and we got to go after China. It's like China, like, and you hear it with the talk of decoupling from China, and when Xi Jinping came to San Francisco and they rolled out the red carpet for him, you saw quite clearly that there's no intention to decouple from China. In fact, our elites don't view China as an adversary. You always hear people say this, like, we need to get tough on China. China is our adversary. And that's just not the case, because, really what it is we need to better define the terms, like we and our. Like, who are you talking about, we and our? Because the elites in our country, the controligarchs, and even the elites in the political class, they don't view China as an adversary. They don't view them as even a competitor. They view China as a partner and a friend. Same thing with Russia when it comes to the nuclear stuff. They don't view China as an enemy. Daniel Poneman, former head of Centrus, doesn't view China as an adversary. He views China as a partner and a business partner and friend. I mean, you can see the photos of him cheersing his champagne glasses with Sergei Kirienko. So what the truth is you and I and the people listening to this show have more in common with your average Chinese peasant or your average Russian citizen than we do with Bill Gates or any of the elites in our country. And the elites in our country have more in common with Xi Jinping and with Zelensky and Putin than any of them have with us. So there's absolutely an alliance amongst the global elites. Now they saber rattle, and that's not to say that, like, in the long term, China isn't going to try to overthrow the global order or something. I wouldn't, if I were our elites, I wouldn't trust China. They've got an ancient history, thousands of years, and they do have sort of very nationalist tendencies, but they're also members of the global elite in the World Economic Forum. And so it's much better if we view all of the people who go to Davos as against us, and that would include the leaders of countries that we would normally think of as adversaries or even enemies.
Perfectly explained.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it goes back to the number one goal of these controligarchs, and they're from every country. I focus on the American ones mainly, and because they're the wealthiest, and so they have the most economic power. But the number one goal is to transfer power away from the United States, away from individual nations, away from the people, into their globalist organizations that they control. And they do this via crises. So, I mean, we talked about the climate crises, sort of touched on the food crises. I mean, the Green Revolution, when the Rockefellers rounded up all the seeds from each individual country and started genetically modifying them, that was to solve the crisis of starvation and malnutrition. And so they pick these crises, and there's always opportunities in crises. The latest being the pandemic. Well, there's more crises on the horizon. I hate to say it, But the pandemic was a pretty big crisis where the world had to come together. And this is where you get the Great Reset, where Klaus Schwab basically says the pandemic, he doesn't basically say it, he says that the pandemic is a great opportunity for a reset where we're going to upend capitalism. We're going to upend all of the economic systems, and we're going to upend our energy systems, and we're going to build back better. And then you heard all the global leaders, all like they're reading from the same script, like build back better. We got to build back better. And what does that mean? That means building systems, tyrannical systems that they control. So from the energy, they want to control all of the energy. They want to right down to the temperature in your home, what kind of vehicle you can drive, where you can go, when you can go places. I mean, they just put a kill switch mandate. Our own Congress, our own elected officials, and they didn't dream this up, and they're dumb enough to accept what, like, the line that, like, oh, this is to prevent drunk driving or something. Every vehicle manufactured after 2026 must be have a kill switch that can be controlled remotely, so that if you're, I guess, going to be a drunk driver, like it just doesn't even make sense. Like, what, the government can all of a sudden detect that you're a drunk driver? I mean, they already have the breathalyzer things that they can install in someone who gets a DUI's car. Why would they need a remote control switch that they can just turn off your vehicle? Well, I mean, you can kind of see, look into the future. If you post something that they deem as misinformation or hate speech, intentionally vague terms that they don't define for you, you might lose your weekend driving privileges. Or if you're a dissident or an opponent of the regime, you might not be able to have your home kept at the same temperature because it's a strain on the grid. And it all sounds sort of crazy, but except for the fact that they're already doing it. You look at the Canadian truckers in Canada in the middle of the winter. They had all of their assets frozen and seized because they were simply protesting against vaccine mandates. And you look in Ireland right now, the rioters who are arguably rightly upset that a non-Irish migrant stabbed multiple children to death. So they start protesting. Well, what do the Irish lawmakers do? They want to pass laws saying that it's illegal to speak out against this kind of thing, and they even are talking about freezing the assets of the protesters, the Irish protesters. Now it's the middle of the winter. You see someone's money in the middle of winter, they might starve, they might freeze. So it's not crazy to say this stuff because it's happening as we speak. And then in America, I mean, January 6th showed that if you are protesting something, and I'm not excusing any of the violent behaviors, but plenty of people who were in Washington on January 6th who've been rounded up, grannies who were just caught, fell into the wrong place, wrong time, are now in jail. And their banks, worked with the government to find them and track them and hunt them down and throw them in jail with no due process. So it's serious business, and it is happening right now.
It appears to be calculated and planned. While the planet and the world's inhabitants are in a crisis, maybe even a manufactured and planned crisis, they take advantage of a global population as a way to roll out new and advancing technologies and use the global population essentially as experimental subjects. Is that fair to say that they do use these crises as a way to start integrating more technology into the human day-to-day life, and if not, into actually physically the human being itself, then going into the transhumanism?
Well, yeah, no, exactly, and I'm glad. Like, I didn't realize the time flies when you're having fun. I didn't realize I've got about maybe 10 minutes left. So this is a perfect time to get into the transhumanist stuff. So yeah, no, exactly. I mean, so Klaus Schwab, when he gets up in July of 2020, and this is really when he came onto the world stage. I mean, he's been the head of the Davos World Economic Forum for decades, since the early 1970s. But most people hadn't heard of him until he gets up in front of the cameras and says it's time for a great reset. And everybody talks about the great reset, and sort of, he's got this very Bond villain-esque accent, and he just seems like a parody of some sort of movie character villain, like Dr. Evil or something. But
vampire.
But what most people don't key in on is when he talks about he says, so what is the Great Reset going to bring about? Well, number one, it's going to bring a green, like we're going to rebuild in a greener way. And people, people kind of wonder, like, what the heck does green and environmentalism have to do with pandemic? We're starting to see that, and climate lockdowns are on the horizon and stuff like that. He also talks about stakeholder capitalism, and we can touch I sort of touched on that, but they wanted to overthrow free market capitalism with a new system called stakeholder capitalism. That's what Klaus Schwab calls it. And stakeholder capitalism is basically what they have in China, which is state-run capitalism, where only the people who are at the World Economic Forum are the stakeholders, and nobody votes for anything. It's really fascism is what it is. But the third thing that he talks about, and this is the transhumanism stuff, is he calls it the fourth industrial revolution. And we need to digitalize everything. And that includes digital ID. It includes central bank digital currencies, and really getting into sort of microchipping humans. And that's the other theme that's really throughout the book here is this whole transhumanist thing is about their desire, and it's an age-old desire to live forever. The one thing that might unite all of us with even the Controligarchs and your average citizen has in common is we're all going to die. That's what everybody has in common. And some people deal with that in different ways. And these Controligarchs are by and large godless atheists who don't believe in an afterlife, so they're probably pretty terrified of death. And so the difference between us and the Controligarchs is that they actually have the resources to try to do something about it. And so that's really what a lot of their goals with transhumanism, from Elon Musk to Mark Zuckerberg to Jeff Bezos wants to upload his brain to the cloud, and they really think that they can mimic, and it's like they have a god complex on steroids. And you see it with that's what the mRNA injections are really all about. It's not about curing the common cold. It's really about reversing aging. And Elon Musk talks about this with mRNA and how magical of a technology it is. Is you can hack the human body. And you can possibly reverse aging. So, I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of other goals. I mean, with the transhumanist thing, they want to create a whole new caste system where, biotechnological upgrades and getting the microchip, and you've got Wikipedia right in your brain, so you can excel. And this is coming where the Neuralink, Elon Musk's company, just got FDA approval this past spring to start human test trials. And in the book I talk about, there's over 10,000 people who've had microchips put into their brains. It'll start small with, like, maybe psychic text messaging, where you can just think a text and send it, and play video games all in your head without the need for a controller. And then eventually they'll give you the upgrade to never feel sad again. And eventually you'll find yourself physically incapable of resistance. That's I'm speaking a little tongue in cheek there, being humorous, but honestly, like that's where this is all headed.
Yeah, and that opens up the possibility for total control over a population of people. First, convince them that this technology integration into their brains or their nervous system is for their own good, or better for their health, or it'll just be fun for them, right? The possibility, though, of this technology being remotely controllable is quite high. I'm speaking out of speculation, though. The common trend that I'm seeing is they have a bloodlust for total control, and how best to do it in the technological revolution, or the fourth technological revolution, by integrating software into human beings that may be controlled by this software, when they believe it's just really convenient, fun, and good for them.
Yeah, no, exactly. There's no telling how many people, and Huxley talks about this in Brave New World, the painless concentration camp, and there's no telling how many people will not just trot or meander or even walk slowly into the painless concentration camp, they'll run into it. And it's, you see it with all technology. I mean, Elon Musk sort of makes a great point that we're already all hooked up to the cloud in a lot of ways through our devices. And he's just trying to remove the middleman, the peripheral, and put it directly there. But I mean, just, you know, look at not your or my or necessarily your listeners, but just have someone look at their screen time, and it's going up every year. Everybody's screen time's going up. I'm certainly guilty of it. I'm always shocked when I look at the amount of time I'm on my device. So I'm good. I'm sort of running out of time here. I've got to feed the baby and get her ready for bed. But solutions, put down the device, go outside. Touch grass has sort of become a meme, but seriously, and it's important to share this information and to get it out and to share this show, and follow people like Bobby who are telling the truth. And Bobby, to your credit, you were and remain years ahead of the curve. I mean, you were on the 2040, is it 2040 or 2045 initiative?
Yeah,
Like years before I was looking at that stuff, and I was like, man, this seems so science fiction. And like, well, they're not going to do this. And 5 years later, it's like, man, you've been so far ahead of the curve. So share Bobby's show, get more people listening, and call to actions. I mean, we've got to act, we've got to organize. The solution to a lot of these problems that are brought on by globalist crises, real and manufactured, is just in a word, local. It can be solved at the local level by organizing locally, getting together with people IRL, that's in real life, and buying everything you can local. Find out where your food's coming from, support your local farmers. Don't be buying the Bill Gates fake meats and stuff like that at the grocery store. Grow your own food if you can, if you've got the space for it. Grow as much of it as you can. Get chickens, all of that. It's 1,000 little actions, but it's choices you make all throughout the day.
Absolutely. Here, there's definitely not enough time in 1 hour to talk about all that we need to talk about. But thank you, Seamus.
I think we got through chapter one. So we'll need 10 more of these.
Okay, yeah, we can organize that, certainly. I would love to do that, actually. So, Seamus Bruner, the author of the brand spanking new book, Controligarchs, Exposing the Billionaire Class, Their Secret Deals, and the Globalist Plot to Dominate Your Life, as well as the Director of Research at the Government Accountability Institute. Again, Seamus Bruner. I want to thank you and congratulate you on all the books and all of your successes so far. And life is a journey, and it's very important we collaborate and work together on these dire issues. So, Seamus Bruner, I want to thank you for all your service so far, and it's an honor to cross paths again, brother.
I love you, Bobby. Thank you so much for your time and having me on.
Alrighty, you're welcome. Yes, we'll
Take
talk
care.
soon. Alrighty. God bless, brother. Peace.
God bless. Bye.